bringing you a steady stream of thought-provoking ideas and cutting-edge innovation. You're listening to Society and the State, Life, Liberty, and Your Pursuit of Happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're talking about Jordan Peterson, and I've seen this guy everywhere. Brian, you're familiar with him a little more than I am, right?
Yeah, just within the last 6 months or so.
Okay, so you and I were talking, hey, we probably can't get Jordan Peterson. He's not coming on the show. We're not that awesome yet. And I thought to myself, who do I know that is an acolyte? Maybe we can find somebody who is a fan, and we could talk to them from their perspective about what attracts them to Jordan's ideas. I literally, the synapses fired so quickly that I immediately knew who I had to reach out to and talk to. She's joining us on today's episode, Brittany Hunter. She's an associate editor with FEE, great organization, the Foundation for Economic Education. But for purposes of today, she, and I should say now you, Brittany, you're just a fangirl? What would you even call yourself? Are you an acolyte, a disciple, or how would you describe it?
Ooh, disciple sounds a little culty, so I want to avoid disciple. Yeah, okay, fangirl. We'll go with fangirl.
Fangirl, Jordan. Well, thanks for joining us on the show. I know that you enjoy talking about and evangelizing the ideas that this guy's talking about. So I'm going to start us off. Brian's going to have other questions, but I'm an ignoramus here, okay? I don't know why this guy came onto the scene all of a sudden. I don't know why I haven't bothered really, reading the Wikipedia article or anything like that. So I'm an ignoramus. Talk to me like you would your Uber driver, right? And like you're trying to tell him all about this guy, Jordan Peterson. Who is he? Why should I care?
He's amazing. But he is a psychologist and also a professor in Canada. Now, the reason he got on everybody's radar is, of course, controversy. People love a good controversy. He had commented on Canada's new laws about pronouns and transgender individuals. And he did not say that he would not call an individual by their preferred pronoun, but he spoke out against the threat of free speech, where there was going to be people fined or perhaps even thrown in jail for not using whatever pronoun it was. So that's what got him on the media's watch. That's what got him, popular. Okay. Uh-huh. But I came across his video by a lot of my economic friends, which I thought was interesting. And it was just these little quippets of wisdom that were some of the deepest things I had heard in a long time. And from there, I kind of went down the YouTube rabbit hole, and I've been hooked for probably about seven or 8 months now.
And so these are primarily philosophical arguments. Does he get into kind of cultural? And you say you had economic friends pointing them to you. Is he getting into economics? How do you kind of describe the broader range of views that he focuses on?
Yeah, well, he does talk about all three of those things. Now, the cultural part I get less from, if I'm being 100% honest. If I had to pick and choose what I love about him, his opinions on culture are not what blows me away. Mm-hmm. What I like about him is this call to self-responsibility, this call to the individual and the hero's journey. And in a lot of ways, it reminds me of how I felt in the height of the Ron Paul Revolution days, where all of a sudden there was so much purpose and meaning. And that's really the only other thing I can think to describe it or even compare it to.
Okay. Now, he recently wrote a book. Brian, I'm going to kick it over to you after this, but I wanted to ask one more really quick before we get in too much deeper. He recently wrote a book called 12 Rules for Life. So, Brittany, I don't know if you're shooting from the hip here. I'm going to put you on the spot. But what's an example of a rule of life that Jordan Peterson is advocating for?
Okay, so I don't remember which rule it is, but one of my favorites is pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. So it's just these great rules of how to make yourself a stronger person. And that one I particularly like, especially as someone who got involved in political activism before I found Jordan B Peterson. Having meaning and having that purpose and living each day for something bigger than yourself is very important to me.
I like how he encourages you to make your bed. If you're interested in making the world a better place,
clean your room.
Yeah, yep. I mean, clean your room, make your. But he's on solid ground there, at least to me philosophically. He's talking about something that anybody could reasonably do that tangibly does make a noticeable difference.
Now, Brittany, is he saying that from kind of a personal development perspective of get your life in order and have good habits, or is he saying it from a don't be hypocritical perspective, like why are you trying to control other people if you can't control yourself?
I think it's a little bit of both. So I like the latter part of what you were saying. I do think it is a little bit of, because one of his rules is set your own house in perfect order before criticizing the world. So he definitely it has a little bit of that aspect to it. But there's also the same argument as a lot of us that are into, states' rights or very local action, right? I get that from him a lot with the Clean Your Room, because it's you start with the smallest thing you can, which is yourself. You fix that. Okay, then you move on. Then you clean your room. All right, then maybe you run for city council. So I kind of look at it as both. And I hope that doesn't contradict each other, but I do think they coincide and they can both coexist.
Brittany, one of the questions I have for you is tell me about the reaction of either yourself or your colleagues who like Jordan Peterson to the fact that he really doesn't embrace politicizing things. That's one of the draws that actually got me to investigate him in the first place. He has a lot of great things to offer, and almost none of them seem to be based in politicized thought.
Yeah, and it's funny. I actually wrote down on things I had to talk about. Politics won't save your soul. That was one of my subheadings, and I kind of wanted to relate it back to this point that he does. He takes the focus away from politics and back on the individual again, which for people who are individualists, I think that resonates so strongly with us because it's kind of what we've been saying all along, but he's expanding on it. So instead of, focusing on or politicizing everything, fix yourself first.
One of the rules that I noticed, and I latched onto it, I just pulled up the list because our next episode is going to be Brian and I talking about advice we would give to our earlier selves. Kind of this idea that, if you could transport back in time and talk to your 20-year-old self, what pearls of wisdom would you share to have a better life, to be a better person, to be more successful or whatever? So because Brian and I are thinking about that for the next episode, I noticed this rule in his 12 rules for life where he says, compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. What does that rule mean to you? Because I imagine you're like, I don't know if it's a female thing, if it's a millennial kind of age thing. I myself am subject to it, so I don't know that it's a gender-based thing, but it seems like many of us are very susceptible to comparing ourselves to other people. How is this rule, like in reading what he has had to say about this rule, has that been an eye-opening thing for you? Is it something that you've dealt with in your life? What does that rule mean?
Yeah, that actually is probably tied for first or second place in my favorite rules. I think that the reason that one hits me a lot is the need to constantly be improving myself. And I think you kind of said our generation, and I think you hit a point there with a lot of us are into these, I don't want to say self-improvement gurus, but people like Tim Ferriss, these people who strive to be better every day. And I think that's something unique to us. But I also think that when we are surrounded by social media and when we're seeing people post only their happiest or most successful stories, you start comparing yourself to everyone around you. And I think also we're guilty of portraying something that might not be real for that very reason, because, again, we're comparing ourselves to everyone else around us. So that really struck a nerve with me, especially the social media aspect of just kind of taking time off from constantly looking at how I compare to my coworkers or someone I graduated from high school with. And, again, just focusing on where I am today and making sure it's better than I was yesterday.
One of the things I wanted to ask you, Brittany, is I see pushback from a lot of different corners against Jordan Peterson, and I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, how is he a threat to the status quo?
In all the best ways. I think he's been calling it the intellectual dark web or something to that extent. Basically, these professors and these people in academia who are standing up to the leftist influence, and I think we've seen that really strongly over the past, even since I've been out of college in the last, 7 to 10 years, the free speech and everything that's just the leftism that is rampant on campus. And here you have someone like Jordan B Peterson that is kind of more traditional, right? He's more right of center, if you will. And he's kind of giving you old conservative grandpa solutions, stand up straight and tall with your shoulders back. But it's resonating because we haven't heard this stuff in so long.
It's like the Nintendo, the original NES making a comeback, right? Or Stranger Things and all the 80s stuff. The nostalgia effect is powerful. And you got to wonder, maybe there's something to it, that all the lessons that, we were taught as little kids that have kind of gone out of vogue, to have somebody else bringing them up again, it kind of creates a popularity all on its own. Is there anything to that, or is that just a weird observation?
I think that's exactly it. I think that's 100% it. I think we've been craving this kind of, traditional wisdom. So I think we're getting what we need. Just
like you want, it's sometimes when you have an unruly child, they won't tell you this, but they crave discipline. They want to be parented, right? They want those boundaries. And so when you have an unruly populace, perhaps it is that deep down inside they need someone to talk some sense into them. They need someone to kind of tell them like it is, and they kind of deep down subconsciously, appreciate it. So I don't know. That's kind of curious. Now let me ask this. You mentioned Ron Paul. And I remember you from your sign-waving days here, holding Ron Paul signs and helping the good doctor try and, get a few more votes. And the criticism we faced at the time was that his following was, and you used the word earlier when I asked you about being a disciple, that the following was a bit cultish. And those of us who were in the movement, oh, no, not at all. He just makes so much sense, and he's a good guy, and he's doing the right thing. Do you find that there are similar accusations against those who are following Jordan? And I ask this as a sideliner in this instance. Again, I've not really read anything by this guy. But from my observation, the passion that I've seen, I mean, you went to this guy's speaking tour thing, right? So you get those people who are all passionate about it and evangelists for these ideas. Do you find that people are making similar accusations about this kind of cult-like status that he's growing, or has that not really occurred yet?
Oh, absolutely. It absolutely is. And like you said, after being in the Ron Paul movement, part of me actually stopped taking that as an insult and kind of took it as tribalism always exists. We see it everywhere. But the cool thing about this is you're picking your tribe.
Sure.
It's not the state telling you where you belong. And so it's kind of nice to come together with all these people who, especially in a room of people who are trying to better themselves, that are taking these rules and applying them, and their T-shirts have, insider jokes that are Jordan B Peterson related. It was really fun. So yes, maybe a little culty. It might be a little bit culty, but in all the best ways.
in that same vein, I was reading last week a column by one of your colleagues there at FEE, Dan Sanchez, talking about Jordan B. Peterson. One of the distinctions he made is that Peterson is he's very astute at putting the value and the emphasis on the individual rather than on the collective. And I'm just curious, as you and those of your friends and your colleagues who really enjoy what Jordan Peterson is offering, as you embrace his message, what do you do to keep yourself in check so that you don't make him into a guru or become a collective identity?
Yeah, one thing I really liked, I actually got to hear his daughter speak. That's how much of a fan I am. I went to hear his daughter speak a couple weeks ago. And she was actually kind of opening up more about his struggles. And that really helped me relate to him in a different way, because I stopped looking at him as someone with all the answers and instead looked at him as somebody who was still figuring it out. And that actually gives me even more respect for him. And I think we come across the same issue even in politics, even with Ron Paul, for example, where you start to wonder, okay, how much of this can this person do wrong? Am I putting this person on too high of a pedestal? So I think it's very important to say that I don't always agree with everything he says. I don't think he has everything right. But when he is right, he's so spot on that it still makes me a very loyal, I almost said follower, but I really don't like that term. Subscriber, I guess.
You almost slipped.
I almost slipped.
Now, I'm just going to keep using the Ron Paul example. So, we can easily kind of fantasize about what a government would look like that was based upon the ideas of peace and prosperity and so forth that Dr. Paul was often talking about in his campaign. Talk to me about, share your vision. What would a society based on the 12 rules for life look like? If you could snap your fingers and everyone is kind of living according to the way that is being prescribed, this common sense grandpa talking to, help our listeners envision what you think that would be like, what life would be like in that type of society.
Yeah, I think most of the problems we see, there's a lack of personal responsibility, even for those that have had wrong happen to them, even for people who are victims. One thing that Jordan B. Peterson does talk about a lot is you're wasting time if you're trying to place blame on someone, because once something has happened to you, it's already happened. And I think a lot of people in our society keep dwelling on things that maybe you can't fix at this point, instead of working on how we can get to a better place from where we are now. We were starting at the point, whether it's a good point or a bad point, we're there. So where are we going to go? And so I think the ideal society is taking self-responsibility, looking within and saying, okay, this is what I can fix. This is what I can't fix. And when you see that happening, that's how unbridled entrepreneurship blooms, right? You have people who are in touch with who they are. And so that allows them to be better at specialization and offering unique products and helping other people create value. So I really think that this form of radical individualism, of looking within first and fixing that, makes everything a better place, makes everyone benefits from that.
Now, one of the accusations against individualism, of course, is this, isolated, people that are not supporting
Selfish.
one another. Yeah, selfish people. And so in elevating the individual, do you find that the Peterson's recommendations are hyper-individualist? Is there any type of communitarian feeling of like, well, we're in this together, we should still help one another? Or is it strictly focused on the self-improvement of the individual, and then he's kind of silent on the rest?
I would say for him, he does more just focus on the individual self-improvement. But for those of us who like what he's saying and are also, free marketeers, I think it's easy for us to put the connection together and to start bringing in Adam Smith, when we talk about him, and start talking about self-interest and the invisible hand. So I think it's easy for his fans to do that. I don't think that he himself does that.
Now, talk to me about the intersection of his ideas with politics. Are these ideas, the crowds you're seeing, the other subscribers, as you call them, are they, right-wing, libertarian, conservative, whatever, or are his ideas finding a broader range of support that moves its way into kind of the moderates and the leftists and so forth?
That's the thing about Jordan B. Peterson is I think primarily his fan base is more right of center. That being said, because he's such a smart man and the things he's talking about, he's talking about Jungian psychology and bringing in Joseph Campbell and A Hero's Journey. It's just so interesting that it's attracting conversation from a lot of different people. So he does talk to leftists. Joe Rogan is not a leftist. I would say he's more of a libertarian. But that's kind of how Jordan B. Peterson rose to prominence, was being on his show. But he has been on more left-leaning shows, and who's the weird British guy?
John
Russell
Oliver?
Brand.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yep.
That one too, Russell Brand. He did Russell Brand's show, and it was one of the most interesting conversations I've ever heard. So I do think he's starting this dialogue with people on all sides of the aisle that we haven't had in a long time. It's been very polarized. So that's been refreshing to watch and listen to.
It may be kind of backwards to ask this question at this point in the interview, Brittany, but what is Jordan Peterson's background? A person doesn't just have a breakthrough like this just on sheer luck alone. Was there a turning point in his life where he, began his own hero's journey?
So he actually said he used to be a leftist, and I don't know how far extreme that is, because I know that I used to call myself that in college, but I had no idea what I was talking about. So who knows? But one thing that I really appreciate about him is he does have a history of studying communist reigns in Russia and all the terrible things that happened. In fact, his house today is filled with old school propaganda from that era. And the reason he keeps it up, he says, is to remember all the terrible things that happened, which sounds kind of dark. But he does that so that he is reminded again of the power of the individual against the collective. So I think that was probably the turning point when he started studying. I think I want to say it was, I don't know if it was actually propaganda, but he started studying something about communist dictatorships. And I believe he said that was his turning point, and that got him into Nietzsche and kind of, I think he fell down the abnormal psych rabbit hole and then got into Jung and Campbell. And then from there, it all kind of spiraled into YouTube videos that he was making for 10 years. I don't think people realize that, but no one was watching them until all of a sudden.
It's like Justin Bieber.
Yes.
Okay, final question, Brittany, and then we're going to wrap it up. I want to know, because it sounds like a lot of this is just common sense ideas, pearls of wisdom that can be found in plenty of other books. As you talk about, there's all sorts of self-improvement gurus. What is it about, in particular, his ideas that have improved your life? You've encountered similar ideas, no doubt, in perhaps your religious background or in other books you've read or other mentors you've had in your life. Why is it that things are clicking here? Why is it that, in particular, the message that he's giving that you've heard elsewhere is now resonating so strongly for you?
Yeah, I think timing, right place, right time. I also don't think it's a coincidence that I happened to read Nathaniel Branden's 6 Pillars of Self-Esteem right at the same time I found Jordan B. Peterson. And it was right after I read the line, "No one is coming to rescue you." And that really hit me because I realized that in life, no one is coming to rescue you, that if you want to have a good life, if you want to be happy, you're going to have to do it yourself, that you can't rely on other people. And it was like the next day I saw my first Jordan B Peterson video, and it just kind of built upon that. So that's kind of how it all clicked for me. I know everybody has a different story, and I love hearing it. Everyone has their own, how did you find, JBP stories, which also sounds very culty. I realize now. But
So we've ended how we started, that it is in fact a cult. No, I'm just kidding. That's all fascinating. Well, Brittany, thanks for joining us. I think that was a fun perspective to kind of see, not so much from him. You can go, people can watch videos of him and read his book and kind of get his ideas. But I think it's kind of interesting to look at these ideas through the lens of someone who has recently kind of glommed onto them and become a subscriber. So appreciate you joining us today. Guys, for those of you listening, we're going to put on the show notes page, we'll link to JBP's, I got to learn the acronym now, JBP's his book and some videos, and then we're going to link, Brittany, to your page at FEE so folks can learn more about you and some of your writings. You're doing a great job over there. Guys, the show notes page is societyandthestate.com/80. Brittany, thanks so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.